This is ChangeMakers with Katie Gore, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
Today's ChangeMaker is Alexandra Jackiw, the Chief Operating Officer at Hayes Gibson Property Services. Alex is recognized both regionally and nationally as one of the most accomplished property management leaders in the industry. Alex, thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Katie. It's my pleasure.
You've been in the multifamily housing and really affordable housing industry for over 40 years. Where did this all begin for you?
Well, just make sure that your audience knows that it's been 40 years, but I started when I was 10.
Perfect. There you go.
Well, it began for me because my chosen field of endeavor when I graduated from college didn't give me the kind of excitement that I thought it would. I majored in chemistry in college. And
Wow.
so I needed to take a different direction. And I went back to school and got a master's degree in education with a focus on counseling psychology and university administration, assuming I was going to be a university administrator. And there was a recession that interceded, and I ended up working for a quasi-governmental agency in Terre Haute, Indiana, just south of where I live today in Indianapolis, and did some grant writing for them and ended up getting roped into working at the local public housing authority. So I cut my teeth on property management, managing public housing projects in Terre Haute, Indiana.
So is there something about that public housing authority job in Terre Haute that really stuck with you? And, was that the launch, or how did you evolve from there?
Yeah, that was definitely the launch. I left the housing authority after several years and went into the private sector and ended up managing affordable housing for a large developer in Indianapolis, a company called Oxford at the time. And my portfolio was full of project-based Section 8 and the old Section 236s. And the development arm of Oxford was starting to build 221D4s with project-based Section 8, usually 20%. And so, my career kind of evolved in that realm as well. I eventually left the affordable housing world and didn't get back involved until many years later when I went to work at Buckingham and got introduced to the LIHTC space, to the tax credit space, when I picked up a portfolio of 8 very troubled tax credit assets. But, when I had the opportunity to go to Hayes Gibson, for me, it was coming full circle, because if you talked to me 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I would have told you that ultimately my goal was to get back into the affordable housing space because it was rewarding to me and meaningful, and I felt like I was making a difference. And that's really kind of where I wanted to write the last chapter of my career before I retired.
Is there something specific that makes it such a passion for you?
I think it's the people side of it. I remember having a conversation with a young lady named Debbie that lived at one of my public housing projects. And I told her that my view of public housing was that it was temporary housing, that it was a way station on the road to a person's success, that this was a safety net that was provided by the government, and that we wanted to work proactively with residents to move them out of public housing, to move them into, the private sector. And, I've embraced that throughout my career. And I think that that's held true in how I approach the affordable housing industry. It's a safety net. For some people, it's long-term housing, and it's the only housing they'll ever have. And for others, it's truly a platform to spring from to do something better and different.
And many of us who have worked in this industry, we can all remember the people we've encountered who have done exactly what you just said. They've used housing and they've used some assistance as a springboard for self-betterment, community betterment, changing their family. And we can name all the Debbies who have gone on to provide such a successful contribution. And, housing was that I think you called it a way station. It was, it was that moment for them. Speaking of your career, I want to name a couple of, well, it's more than a couple, but accolades about you. The Real Estate Forum magazine named you a woman of influence in real estate. The Institute of Real Estate Management named you one of the women who was changing the face of property management. You've also been honored as a woman of influence by the Indianapolis Business Journal, and you've even been inducted into the National Apartment Association Hall of Fame. Those are substantial accolades, and they're really reflective of your substantial accomplishments. What do these honors, what do they represent for you?
I think you're going to find it odd for me to say that, but I don't focus on them very much. I think humility is an important trait for leaders, and there are lots of people on whose shoulders I stand that helped me get to where I got to. And I feel like those accolades or those acknowledgments are more a reflection of the fact, that I've been doing this a long time. And, I appreciate having the acknowledgement of my peers, but I still feel like my work's not done. So I don't spend a whole lot of time staring at plaques on a wall. It's nice to get the accolades from your industry peers, but there's more work to be done.
When you were inducted into the National Apartment Association's Hall of Fame, is that a Michael Jordan moment for housing practitioners, or is that plaque just on the wall with the rest of them?
It's kind of a big deal. It's the award's only been given in the 80 years of the apartment industry. I think it's only been given 20 or 21 times. And so that's meaningful because it acknowledged my lifetime of work, not just within the organization, not just within the National Apartment Association, but the work I've done, at the university level teaching, as well as some of my other volunteer work. So it really embraced the whole body of my kind of industry involvement. So that probably is, of all the accolades, the most meaningful to me.
Well, and I appreciate your humility, but I also think it is amazing that these industries have recognized you in so many different avenues, and that your innovation, and all of the things that you've done, not just about who you are, but all of the things that you've done, and so it is a very impressive list. And along that line, you even started a scholarship program. I think it was through the National Apartment Association, wasn't it?
That's probably the one thing I'm proudest of that I've accomplished over the course of the years. I have been teaching National Apartment Association certification courses for years. And it was very clear to me early on that people of color and other ethnic minorities and minorities of all types were missing from my classes. And, why was that? I kept asking myself the question, where are these people? Is it price? Is it access? Is it lack of support from their employers? Either way, I struggled with that. And each year, when I was chairman of the board of the National Apartment Association in 2013, each year the NAA awards the outgoing chairman a gift of substantial value. And when people surreptitiously inquired about what I wanted the gift to be, I said, I don't want a gift. What I want you to do is provide seed money for a scholarship for diversity and inclusion. And I want people to have access to certification programs. And as misfortune would have it, the year I finished my chairmanship, my mother passed away. And what I asked for was for people to donate to the scholarship fund in lieu of other kinds of things that they might have done. So we ended up with a significant pot of money that we were able to then use to award scholarships. And it's been really rewarding for me to touch base with people over the course of the last several years that have gotten their designations as a result of those scholarships. And I've enjoyed staying in touch with them and watching their careers grow.
Are there any recipients that you want to highlight?
Well, James Burwell is one down in Mississippi. Jordan Campbell's another, originally from Arizona. I think he's in San Antonio now. And Shirlita Davis is out of Texas also. I can't remember the city. Those are three that come to mind immediately.
In this scholarship fund to increase diversity and inclusion in the rental housing profession, I mean, I think that this is not only is this type of initiative, many years ahead of where society kind of is struggling to catch up, but think about how much you opened up access and the avenues, and then to that person, but then that person it multiplies even more their involvement within the industry. So it's not just that primary touch point, but there's so many other avenues just from your one action that has now occurred.
Well, and the rewarding thing is that some of these people feel the responsibility. And I've spoken to some of them and they said, how do I repay this? And I said, you pay it forward. You donate to the scholarship fund. You create opportunities for people to have access to education because that's the only way we change the industry.
I agree in that. And many people are looking for ways to be able to get involved. And so this is a really good one to highlight here, even on our podcast. So kind of changing things here, what's the biggest way that you think really the field of multifamily housing, what do you think the biggest thing has changed since COVID, since March 2020?
I just finished a series of training seminars for a couple of apartment associations. And the seminars dealt with transformational leadership. And as I was putting it together, I was thinking, wow, we've had a major, what I call, what experts call a black swan event, an unforeseen event with unforeseen circumstances that's dramatically changed how we do things. And so as I look at the industry, obviously there was a quick embrace of technology, even more so than previously, and a shift of paradigms, a shift in the way leaders think about the business and how they look at their workforce and where the workforce is housed and what are essential and non-essential functions, and how do you shift and outsource certain things that maybe you were doing in-house that don't make sense anymore. And probably from my perspective, the biggest thing has been a greater emphasis on talent management. Certainly it's more difficult when it's remote, but you've got to hang on to your talent. You've got to develop that talent and keep them focused on what needs to happen. And it takes on many different forms. I made a lot of changes within our own organization as a result of it, learned some valuable lessons. And I think a lot of people sit back and say, wow, what a terrible year 2020 was. Yeah, it was challenging, but we fundamentally shifted the way we do business. And I'm not sure we're ever going to go back to doing business the way we did it previously, nor should we.
Right. Well, and I think of even in our line, we've switched how we do our briefings and, just to be able to offer those in a more technologically savvy way. It provides better access. It provides more flexibility of scheduling. And, it just kind of opens up better customer service in some areas too. But it did take a lot of creativity to get there. Definitely.
Well, and one of the things that it's helped me realize, and your word sums it up perfectly, is providing access. There was a time when I would interact with a handful of people when I visited a property or on a conference call. But, since the pandemic, since the end of March, I've been having calls with the entire field staff. So all 200 plus of our employees can call in and ask me questions once a week. We started out with twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays, and then as things kind of calmed down with COVID, we reduced it to once a week, every Tuesday. And I will tell you that when I asked the team if they wanted to reduce the frequency of the calls to every other week, everybody categorically said no. They wanted to continue to have that kind of individualized contact for whatever period of time was carved out once a week to hear what was going on at the company and to raise concerns and questions and to get their questions answered by the department heads that were also on the call.
And that's not something that you normally see when you think of traditional emergency crisis planning. And so that's definitely, I think you even said transformational leadership right there to kind of say, my employees need to hear from me, regularly. They need to call in, they need a touch point. They need, not necessarily guidance really, but just to have access, to have that information. So, and speaking of emergency crisis planning, obviously those people who had crisis planning, either on paper, they sure got to test their theories this last year. People who didn't have any protocols quickly had to find some. But what would you say are the essentials to be included within really every affordable housing crisis management plan?
Well, I think any crisis management plan has to put people first. The people are your essential focus. And I believe that if we take care of our employees will take care of our residents. My focus was primarily on what do the employees need? What do they need in the way of information? What do they need in the way of equipment? What do they need in the way of systems and processes? And what obstacles can I take out of their way to allow them to get their jobs done? Understanding that they were struggling with the same things our residents were struggling with, the fear of what this disease was, and children at home that needed to be homeschooled, and trying to figure out what trigonometry was all about when you're helping a child studying at home, and staying focused on taking care of residents. So employees first. And we put those protocols in place pretty quickly and sourced PPE for the employees, got it shipped, made sure they were well supplied, located alternate suppliers where supplies were low, answered their questions. And then what do the residents need? How do we care for our residents when their loved ones can't visit them? How do we provide PPP for the residents? How do we provide food for people that are homebound and don't have family? How do we reassure them that we're, sanitizing the spaces and taking care of them? And what do we do in emergency situations? So as a people focused, a lot of information. I spent a lot of hours fine-tuning our procedures. And the good news is that the questions that were raised on those calls that we were having twice a week early on, every Tuesday, Friday, informed my decisions to adjust our guidelines and shift priorities. So we had just-in-time information from what was going on in the field, and that helped a lot. But I also learned that we have very unique populations on our properties, and I was running around looking for translators to not just translate documents into Spanish, but into Burmese and Croatian, lots of other languages, so that we could reach people that needed the information and needed to understand what was going on.
Strategic planning comes so naturally for you, and you laid out a course that really had to be mobilized in real time with so many unknown variables. All right, we've got to stop right here. But coming up in part 2 of my discussion with Alexandra Jackiw, the Chief Operating Officer at Hayes Gibson Property Services, Alex talks to us about how the industry responded on the ground to the pandemic.
The one thing that has been extraordinarily rewarding, however, is how resilient our field personnel have been and how focused they were on taking care of residents and how creative they were in their approaches.
Thanks for listening to ChangeMakers with Katie Gore. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.